Here's a question. What if I told you that one of the most famous moments in human history, a scene that was painted by Leonardo da Vinci, reenacted in 1,000 churches, referenced in movies and books and everyday speech, what if I told you that most of us have been picturing it almost completely wrong? Not the people, not the room, something deeper than that. We've been missing what was actually happening in that room. We've been hearing the words, but not the music underneath them. Because the people at that table were not hearing brand new words for the first time. They were hearing something ancient, something they'd done every single year of their lives, suddenly take a turn none of them saw coming. And when you understand what they already knew, the whole scene comes alive. Welcome to Now It Makes Sense. I'm Dr. William Attaway. This is the show where we step back into the ancient world of the Bible, where the Bible came from, so that what these texts meant then finally makes sense now. No background required, no prior faith assumed, just honest questions and a story richer than you were told. So let's talk about the Last Supper. Here's the first thing that changes everything. And a lot of people have never been told this. The Last Supper was a Passover meal. That's not a minor footnote. That's the key to the whole room. In the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus and his disciples gather in an upstairs room in Jerusalem to celebrate Passover, the oldest, most important festival in the Jewish year. So to understand what's happening at that table, you have to understand what Passover is. Let me take you back even farther, about 1,200 years before that night. The story of Passover is the story at the heart of Jewish identity. The people of Israel were slaves in Egypt for generations. And the book of Exodus tells how God brought them out through a series of plagues that fell on Egypt, ending with the most terrible one of all. On that final night, each family was told to take a lamb, a perfect lamb, no defects, to kill it and to put its blood on the door frames of their houses. And the angel of death would pass over every home that was marked by the blood of the lamb. That's where the name comes from. Passover. Death passing over. And then they ate roasted lamb, bread made without yeast because they were leaving in such a hurry, there was no time to let the bread rise. Bitter herbs symbolizing the bitterness of slavery. And God gave them a command that echoes down through the centuries. Do this every year. Remember this night. Tell your children so that no generation ever forgets where you came from and who brought you out. So now, fast forward back to that upstairs room with Jesus. Every person at that table had done this meal every year of their lives. As children, as teenagers, they knew the rhythm of it by heart, the way you know the words to a song that you've sung since you were small. And this is the part most of us miss. By the first century, the Passover meal had a shape, an order, specific foods eaten in a specific sequence, specific cups of wine lifted at specific moments, specific words spoken, specific questions asked. It was, in one sense, a script, one that everyone in that room had rehearsed their entire lives. Now, I want to be honest with you here because this is a show for people who'd rather have the truth than a tidy story. The fully detailed Passover ceremony that Jewish families practice today, the formal Seder, with its written order of service, much of that took shape in the centuries after Jesus, especially after the Jerusalem temple was destroyed in the year 70. So we have to be careful not to assume every single detail of a modern Seder was sitting on that table. But the core was absolutely there. The lamb, the unleavened bread, the bitter herbs, cups of wine at set moments, the retelling of the Exodus story, the structure of remembrance, where everything on the table meant something and was used to tell the story. Those elements are ancient, and they were all present that night. So when we walk through this, hear it as, here is the world of meaning those disciples carried into that room. And it's that world that makes what Jesus does so staggering. So let's talk about the cups. The Passover meal was marked by cups of wine, traditionally 4 of them, lifted at different points in the meal. And each cup carried meaning, each one connected to a promise. There's the first cup, the opening cup, called the cup of sanctification, that sets the meal apart and begins it. There's a cup tied to the telling of the story, the cup of deliverance, as they tell the story of the plagues, of slavery, and of God's deliverance of his people. Then there's a cup that comes after the meal itself. In Jewish tradition, this third cup came to be called the cup of redemption, connected to God's promise. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. Redemption, rescue, a price paid to buy a people back out of slavery. And then there's the final cup, called the cup of praise, tied to the great songs of thanksgiving. Now watch what Jesus does. The Gospel of Luke tells us that Jesus took bread and broke it and said, "This is my body, given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Now pause on that word, remembrance. That is Passover language. The entire meal exists to remember. And Jesus reaches into the most sacred remembrance his people have. And he puts himself at the center of it. Then Luke tells us something very specific. He says Jesus took the cup after supper, after the meal, and said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." After supper, the cup that comes after the meal. Many scholars believe this is the third cup, the cup of redemption. Now let that land. For more than 1,000 years, Jewish families had lifted that cup to remember how God redeemed them from slavery in Egypt. How spreading the blood of a lamb on their doorpost meant the angel of death would pass over them and they would go free. Now Jesus lifts that same cup, the cup of redemption, the cup of rescue, and he says, "This is my blood." He's not inventing a new ceremony out of nowhere. He's stepping into the oldest, most rehearsed, most beloved ritual his people had. And he's saying, in effect, this was always pointing somewhere. It was pointing to this, to me. I am the Lamb. My blood is the blood on the doorpost. The redemption you've remembered every year, it's happening now. And it's happening through me. I want you to imagine being in that room. You have lifted this cup every year of your life. You know exactly what it means. You could recite the words in your sleep. And then your rabbi, your teacher, this man that you have left everything to follow, takes the script that you've known since childhood, and at the precise moment you're expecting the familiar words about Egypt and the lamb and the blood on the door, he says something no one's ever said. "This is my blood." That room would have gone silent. Not because they fully understood. They didn't, not yet. But because they knew the script. And they knew he'd just done something to it that no one had ever done. He'd stepped into the story as though the whole thing had been about him all along. Here's why this matters so much for how we read the rest of it. If you don't know the Passover, you hear "this is my blood" as a strange, even troubling line, out of nowhere, disconnected. But if you know what that cup was, if you know the 1,000-year weight that it carried, the lamb, the doorpost, the rescue from slavery, the promise to redeem, then you realize Jesus is making one of the boldest claims a human being has ever made. And he's making it in a language every person at that table understood in their bones. He's not adding a footnote to Passover. He's claiming to be its fulfillment. Now, you might believe that claim, or you might not. That's not the point of today. The point is simply this: you cannot even understand what is being claimed until you know what the original audience already knew. They didn't need it explained. The meaning was in the air they breathed. The cup, the bread, the timing, the remembrance, all of it was loaded with meaning before Jesus said a single word. And he reached into that loaded moment and he turned it. That's what context does. It doesn't just add detail. It hands you the meaning the first audience already had. And suddenly a scene you thought you knew becomes something you're seeing for the very first time. The bread, the cup after supper, the oldest meal in the world, taking a turn no one expected. Now it makes sense. Next week, we'll step into another story that we think we know and find out it's been pointing in a direction most of us never noticed. Wherever you are, whatever you believe or don't, you are welcome at this table. God can handle your questions. This is the place for them.